Great. So thank you all for being here. We're really honored that about 100 people or even more by now are here to hear our presentation. Tina and I started working together 4 years ago to create the LGBTQI history timeline of Sonoma County. We have created 5 hard panels. So when you're looking at this, one of the timeline pieces is on the left of your screen. And so there's 5 of these panels, they're 4 by 4, and they portray the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, queer, and intersex history of our area. And then we have a 6th panel, which was created in honor of the 50th anniversary of Stonewall. We've actually seen people cry when they read this, or they put to an entry and say, oh, I remember that, I was there for that. So this past winter, we also gave a timeline presentation to 200 students at the Introduction to Queer Studies class at Sonoma State University. Actually, it was the day before the school went to online presentations. Today, we're going to be doing our presentation on lesbians. Both of these talks and the panels are available if you're looking for something new for a meeting or event. Tina has been teaching a class based on the timeline at the Santa Rosa Junior College Senior Program. So I've taken the major responsibility for this presentation, putting it together from our previous research. I want to thank Tina's partner, Pat, my partner, Jody, also Magi and Adam for their help with the 1980s and 90s, and for the Lesbian Archives of Sonoma County for their continued recording of lesbian history. And I want to thank you to everyone who has contributed pictures and flyers, information, stories, or just given us personal support over the past 4 years. We know that there are holes in today's presentation. For instance, we don't have anything on Sonoma Valley or the Cloverdale area. We've looked high and low for information about Latina lesbians. We did find an announcement of a Latina feminist meeting and a picture of Latino gay men's drag queen contest, but we haven't found any Latina lesbians. So if you have something that can fill in a gap we have here, please let us know. The earliest lesbian activity in Sonoma County that we could find is the Vauquerets Bar that was outside the town of Guerneville on Highway 116. This legendary roadhouse and dance bar was opened and run by 2 women. And according to one person, these women were lesbians in the mid-90s. Then Kay Corral, a popular lesbian entertainer and drag king from San Francisco, bought the Vauquerets in 1965, and she ran it when she retired from performing at North Beach. In 1967, Ricky Stryker bought it. This is the same time she owned and ran the San Francisco lesbian bars of Maud's and Amelia's. The Vauquerets allowed lesbians to be in public spaces that weren't controlled by the mafia. They could find others like themselves and create their own self-identity. During the summer months, Ricky would have bartenders from Maud's come up to the Vauquerets to work. Ricky and the bartenders may have stayed in the house behind the bar. Lesbians from San Francisco definitely came up to the Vauquerets because they didn't have to worry about the bar being raided and everyone being outed in the newspapers. The Sonoma County Sheriff in one interview said that he wasn't going to bother the Vauquerets because they weren't doing anything wrong or illegal. In 1968, at the same time that the Vauquerets existed, a new generation of lesbians was creating a different type of lesbian identity than bar dykes. Communal life, wild, creative women came to Sonoma County. Musician Chris Williamson and Lindy an old farmhouse outside Cotati, and they named it Cloud Farm. They invited other artists primarily but not exclusively lesbian, to live with them in order to cover the whole $100 rent. They rebuilt the barn to include a sound recording studio and a dance floor. One of the women was a trapeze artist, so there was a trapeze set hanging from the rafters. Another lesbian resident named B.S. Bull was a comic illustrator. Women lived there for about 10 years. The women at Cloud Farm in the late 1960s began to explore that new lesbian culture that we normally think of as starting in the early to mid 1970s.
In 1970, the Santa Rosa Junior College offered one of the first women's studies classes in the United States. It was called Social Change in the American Woman and was focused on the changing role of women in society. Ann Neal, who taught it, said, about 100 students showed up, a third of them men, both straight and gay. They were hungry to deal with the topic, and it was the most intense class I've ever taught. The Killing of Sister George is a play where lesbians are portrayed as physically and emotionally abusive, as well as being victims. In 1972, when they found out the play was going to be performed at the junior college, Ann Neal and other faculty and students organized a protest. They formed the Gay Community Coalition to protest the play. The Community Coalition included lesbians and gay men from Sonoma State University and the JC, as well as community-based lesbians and gay men. The protest took two forms. One was protesting the play itself. The other was a two-day symposium to discuss both how the play was insulting to lesbians and the reality of the lives of lesbians and gay men. The gay men of the JC and SSU took an active part in the protest and symposium at a point when gay men and lesbians didn't usually work together. In 1970 and 71, J.J. Wilson and other women professors at Sonoma State University began teaching women's studies classes, including women's history, La Chicana, Black women in American society, and women in art. J.J. Wilson succeeded in getting a women writers class accepted for the GE requirement, which meant that many more students would be exposed to women writers and their new ideas. The Women's Studies program at Sonoma State University was one of the earliest in the US, and it was started in the fall of 1973. In those early years, J.J. Wilson, Ann Neal, and Ruth Mahaney developed the program. Other program directors followed. Women's Studies was based on student-taught classes. Students who wanted to teach classes were required to present course proposals for approval to the Women's Studies Board, which was composed of faculty, staff, and Women's Studies students. At the height of this early phase in the program, there were upwards of 20 different courses offered. Some titles were Our Bodies Ourselves, Woman Identified Woman, Women in Creativity, Women in Madness, and The Personal is Political. Speaker panels were often used as an effective way to educate people about the lesbian experience during the early years of the women's movement. A panel of lesbian speakers was invited to the Changing Woman class in spring of 1972 at SSU. For many students, it was the first time they'd seen or talked to a gay, or in this case, a lesbian person. During the mid-1970s to 80s, there were several attempts to close the Women's Studies program. One year, the budget was simply zeroed out. The students fought back, writing to the state representatives and complaining to the governor. At one point, Governor Brown called the college president and said he wasn't sure what was going on with women's studies, but he didn't want to hear any more about it, and that the president should take care of it himself.
With the second wave of feminism in the 1970s, social mores and cultural movements changed dramatically. Women were rapidly breaking out of the roles that had been forged for them during the 1950s and 60s. We needed to learn and understand who we were as women without outside voices trying to control our conversation. With all of our wild and wonderful creative visions, we worked together, redefining what it meant to be a woman and what kind of work we could actually do. Morning Star Trucking was a collective of lesbians driving 18-wheel trucks. It distributed food to health food stores and buying co-ops. Their area ranged from Idaho to the South Bay of San Francisco, all the way down to Southern California. In those days, you didn't see many women driving 18-wheelers. Their work was heavy and exhilarating and full of adventure. Sometimes, quote, on the road for far too many nights. Their favorite CB radio sign-off was, "This is Morning Star, 1010 on the side, over and out." Lesbians created new businesses and institutions like women's centers and health clinics. We discovered new ways of learning, how to make decisions for ourselves, and explored women's spirituality. Separatist space was integral to our emancipation, evolution, and self-determination. The Star and Crescent Cafe and Moonrise Cafe were two of the new types of spaces to gather in Sonoma County.
Local and Bay Area lesbian music and performance groups performed at the Moonrise and the Star and Crescent cafes. Fundraisers for local organizations were also held at these venues. In the early 70s, 7 lesbians and 1 straight man created a crazy, funny show of improv theater and music for an end of the school year celebration at SSU's Humanistic Psychology program. The gang band ended up with a regular gig in San Francisco, as well as performing locally and at women's music festivals. The straight guy was declared an honorary lesbian. In 1975, Minerva Productions was the first production company to provide an alternative source of entertainment to bars for lesbians in Sonoma County. Although when they started, they did not have a lot of skills, they combined their community ideals with a can-do spirit and developed the production skills necessary to successfully push through all obstacles. They produced the Women on Wheels concert, which was the local stop of the national tour of these lesbian musicians. Their success showed others how a group without any background can learn together and accomplish anything they set their minds to and have fun doing it. The Pen Grove Women's Center was started in 1972 when Joanna Griffin offered the ground floor of the building she lived in to be used as a women's space. It became a place for community women interested in feminism to meet and work with Sonoma State women's studies students and maybe eventually come out. Numerous women's groups, including some Sonoma State women's studies classes, held meetings there. This cultural center was also a great place for women's dances, concerts, and poetry readings. It included a lending library, a pool table, and office space. The lending library became the original inventory of Rising Women's Bookstore. Rising Women's Books and Clearlight Books became places where community feminists and lesbians could meet and interact. Feminism and lesbianism were inseparable in the mid-1970s. Lesbian activism fueled feminist activity in Sonoma County, but lesbians had to decide if they were going to emphasize lesbianism or feminism. They needed to choose how they presented themselves and their organizations in public. Sometimes they chose to not personally identify as lesbian in order to make their organizations inviting and open to heterosexual women, especially when it came to service organizations. These lesbians were out in their personal lives and used lesbian culture to nourish themselves. But the lesbians were concerned that if they were out at the agencies where they worked, straight women would be afraid to use those services of lesbian organizations. In one incident in a battered women's shelter, a teenage student from the Santa Rosa JC was in the shelter with her mother. This young woman was reading a lesbian novel. Even though more than half of the staff was lesbian, the young woman was told not to read the book there because other clients would think the shelter was a lesbian organization. Yet that student was a client there and the staff was primarily lesbian. Feminism and women's studies gave lesbians a political analysis and theory which provided a foundation of unity and direction that increased our ability to mobilize. Newspapers were essential for organizing and networking in our community. They allowed lesbians and straight women to work together, network, and create an interconnected feminist community that grew and flourished. The papers also acknowledged and discussed political disagreements and factions within the community so a deep understanding of each other could occur. Ads and bulletin boards allowed women to organize meetings, plan events, and connect women to resources in the community. And over time, Sonoma County had 2 women's newspapers. Runes started out as a newsletter for the Luna Collective in Sonoma and was later published from 1976 to 1980 in Santa Rosa. The group and newsletter became more politicized in order to support a local woman who was gang raped. At around the same time, a group of lesbians at Sonoma State University were discussing publishing a paper. At first, the lesbian students were hesitant to work with the straight women in the Luna Collective. While the students were processing their issues, most of the straight women in the Luna Collective came out, and the 2 groups started working together. Runes had a different theme every month and addressed both local and national issues. They invited input from the community, and sometimes that input was critical. In a June of '97 issue, Runes ran the following letter from an anonymous welfare mother on their front page that read, quote, "You murder me, women's liberationist, every bullshit demand you make, not because what you ask is wrong, but because of what you leave out. Where is the nourishing food for me so my child isn't born premature or retarded? When you make love, it's meaningful. It's exploring alternative lifestyles. It's individual freedom. It's finding yourself and discovering sexuality. When I screw, it's immoral, irresponsible, decadent, evil, promiscuous, casual, low, and wrong. I'm supposed to live in forced celibacy," unquote. This letter publicly expressed this woman's pain and anger at the women's movement that she did not fit into. By publishing the letter, Runes attempted to start a discussion about class in Sonoma County women's movement. We only have 2 surviving issues of Runes, so we don't know what the response was. Women's Voices was distributed all over the US between 1980 and 2010. It was one of the longest running women's newspapers in the country. It also had a theme for each issue and printed all sides of the topic. Its rich coverage of political and social issues, poetry and creative writings, its monthly calendar of events, classified section, and ads for women's businesses publicized the growing Sonoma County lesbian community. Women around the US would read these papers and learned about the thriving lesbian feminist community that had developed here in Sonoma County. Then they would decide to move here and be part of it. Women who moved here included activist Shira Hadid, poet Martha Cortot, and playwright and actor Carolyn Gage, and many lesbians from the Bay Area, such as Del Martin and Phyllis Lyon, who had a summer home here. Their cottage still stands in Jenner and is still painted bright purple.
In the mid to late 1970s, Guerneville, California became a gay boom town. Wohler Beach on the Russian River paved the way for Guerneville to become the gay vacation destination. Although Wohler Beach was usually known as a gay male beach, over time it developed into 3 beaches: the super famous gay beach, a lesbian beach, and a mixed gender straight beach. In 1977, 3 women, Tony Canizero, along with a woman named Betty and another woman named Barbara, opened the Rusty Nail Bar across from the beaches on River Road. Charter buses full of gay men coming up from San Francisco for the day would stop at the Rusty Nail for a drink before and after going to Wohler Beach. Fife's was the first big gay resort in Guerneville. The old resort had been empty for several years, and then it had flooded. In 1977, Peter Pender bought the place and transformed it into a full-service, beautifully landscaped gay resort. The cabins had been moldy and in disrepair. Pender hired Jerry Salzig, a licensed contractor, who brought her predominantly lesbian construction crew in to repair the cabins. When the resort opened, they say that gay men worked in the kitchen cooking the pies, and lesbians did the maintenance and carpentry on the cabins. The clientele was primarily middle and upper class white men. lesbian customers were only tolerated. In 1980, lesbian employees at Fife's finally got Peter Pender to agree to a women's weekend. Women's Weekend initially was focused only on camping out in the woods and canoeing. Over the years, it grew to encompass a variety of events and activities, which created, quote, an experience where women would not feel invisible. At its peak, 5,000 women attended. Local men would decide to stay home and barbecue on those weekends and just turn Guerneville over to the lesbians. In 1978, the River Queen Women's Center opened. It offered space for women to, quote, grow and be ourselves. They would share resources, meet, teach classes, receive skills training, and exchange unneeded items. Members paid a small membership fee to have voting rights, library privileges, and a monthly newsletter. In the mid to late 70s, in the lesbian community, there seemed to be no way to have fun that didn't involve drinking. Alcohol was all around, whether going to the bars or having multiple beers at a softball game. Then word spread through Sonoma County AA that some women in Los Angeles had started an alcohol rehab program that was specifically aimed at lesbian women. Suddenly, it seemed that a lot of women who were bar regulars were now on the wagon. AA had 4 LGBT meetings, 1 lesbian meeting, 1 gay meeting, and 2 mixed-gendered gay meetings. Other 12-step and Al-Anon programs followed shortly thereafter for gay and lesbian partners and families of the drinkers. In 1978, at a New Year's Eve party, newly sobered dykes who were trying to celebrate and be social without alcohol had an idea. They created Brown Bag Readers Theater. The name came from the brown bags that were used to hide both alcohol and lesbian printed material. Brown Bag Readers Theater performances were focused on issues of alcoholism, addiction, codependency, and recovery. Members of Brown Bag and others in the 12-step community wrote their own scripts, which supported their own sobriety and recovery. So, Sonoma County Lesbians and Gay Men created In Celebration of Life, an annual 12-step conference for the LGBT community. It convened from 1981 to 1991. It was the first time AA and Al-Anon worked together in this region. Workshops and panels focused on the effects of alcoholism and addiction on the LGBT community, and there was always a dance on Saturday night.
In 1978, lesbians used the organizing skills they had learned from doing feminist organizing to help fight the anti-gay movement. The Lesbian and Gay Alliance was formed by a group of 7 lesbians and gay men shortly after Anita Bryant started a national anti-gay movement. They worked to educate and prepare the Sonoma County lesbian and gay community for Anita Bryant and the John Briggs Amendment. The Alliance soon started a newsletter that was printed for 2 years by a much larger group of lesbians and gay men. Anti-gay Anita Bryant was a prominent actor, singer, and advertising icon in the 60s and 70s. In 1977, she led a national movement to repeal early lesbian and gay protective ordinances and block lesbians and gays from adopting children. There were many creative protests against her. Once she got a pie in her face, as well as traditional protests. In 1978, her success in other states led to the Briggs Initiative in California, Proposition 6. This proposition would have fired LGBT teachers or any public school employee who made pro-gay statements or even mentioned the word gay in class. Proposition 6 was eventually defeated in a statewide vote. Sonoma County Residents Against Proposition 6, or SCRAP 6, was the local organization of gays and lesbians that came together to fight the Briggs Initiative. SCRAP 6 became the most successful grassroots campaign against Briggs in the state. Volunteers created literature, posters, buttons, and bumper stickers that were used in the Bay Area and in Northern California. SCRAP 6 put up the only No on 6 billboard in the whole state. Hundreds of people of all sexual orientations went into churches, classrooms, and civic organizations to start conversations about Proposition 6. One of the lies that Briggs was spreading was that gay men were pedophiles. To help fight that myth, a gay man and a lesbian would go door to door together, introducing themselves as gay and lesbian and talking about the true consequences of Proposition 6. Doing this together allowed gay men and lesbians to get to know each other in a new way and develop personal friendships. Briggs came to Sonoma County twice for debates. SCRAP 6 chose lesbian Claudia Norby and a gay man, Sandy Lowe, to debate Briggs in Kenwood. Then in Healdsburg, Briggs debated Larry Berner, a gay elementary school teacher who had been accidentally outed in a local newspaper. The debate took place in a restaurant meeting room. SCRAP 6 set up speakers on the porch so that everyone could hear the debate. After the debate, a rally started and the organizers had to create a line of lesbian and gay peacekeepers, shoulder to shoulder, so the police could move Briggs and his followers out without interacting with the rally. As Briggs was being driven away, he stopped the car, got out, and went up to a lesbian. He said, quote, "Am I so scary now that you have seen me in person?" The lesbian turned it back on him and asked, quote, "No, now that you've seen me in person, am I so scary?" Briggs turned and without saying anything, went back to his car and drove off.
In 1980, two different court cases involving lesbians went to the California Supreme Court, and both ended up setting legal precedent. The Sonoma County lesbian community provided financial and emotional support for both cases. The first case was brought by Michelle Porter, a Black lesbian with children. She answered a rental ad in Forestville. When she showed up to see the house, the owners refused to show it to her because they would only rent to a family, implying she, her children, and her woman friend did not qualify as a family. Her housemate, a white woman, later answered the same ad and was shown the house. Michelle filed a fair housing complaint, and that required that a Black psychologist and a white psychologist evaluate Michelle and her children. The judge ruled against her, disregarding the Black doctor's testimony that stated that they were adversely affected by the realty company's action. The judge agreed with the white psychologist who said Michelle imagined racism where it did not exist. Eventually, the case went to the California Supreme Court, and Michelle won her racial steering case. She was awarded $100,000. This became a landmark case for housing discrimination cases in California. In 1980, Mary Kowach had a child using the turkey baster method. The sperm donor originally agreed to not participate in raising the child. However, after a boy was born, he sued for paternity and partial custody. The court ruled in his favor. Mary said the DA's office and the judge were very clearly upset that a lesbian woman would choose to raise a male child alone. The case went to the California Supreme Court, which ruled that if a woman used a known donor, even if she had only recently just met him, insemination had to be done by a doctor at his office in order for the donor not to have paternity and custody rights. This ruling applied to any single woman, not just lesbians. Most children in the lesbian community in 1980 had been born when lesbians were married to men. Some women had to fight in courts to have any relationship with their children, only because they were lesbians. Many fathers shared custody and were actively raised their children in a traditional patriarchal way. This is the first generation of children raised by lesbians in a feminist community. One of the ways the lesbian community tried to support the mothers was to provide free childcare at events. But for at least one mother, race and class was a big issue. This mother did not fit into the vision of a middle-class woman just having one child. This woman felt like the other, an outsider. She was able to develop a support network of friends among interracial LGBT couples. But one comment she made was, white liberal people can be very racist, unintentionally. Boy children were sometimes also a dividing issue in the community. Mary Kowach in 1980 was one of the first lesbians in Sonoma County to have a child without having a relationship with a man. She noticed that her community support lessened when she had a boy. In the late 1970s and early 80s, separatists said they saw boys bullying girls and acting in ways that these sons had learned from their fathers and from patriarchal society. They felt they had the right to not have this male energy in their new developing lesbian community. Separatists sometimes said inappropriate and hurtful things to the mothers who were raising their sons and loved their sons. These caused these mothers to become more cautious about who they brought into their lives, and they sometimes became less involved in their community. By 1989, there was a support group for lesbian moms called Lavender Stork. There were a number of male children in this group, and separatism was no longer an issue. The lesbian baby boom had been started.
HIV and AIDS was at one point called the gay plague. Several generations of gay men were wiped out. Thousands of men died, from famous musicians and actors in big cities to everyone in friendship circles in rural communities. Sonoma County had the highest HIV infection rate of any rural community in the United States. By 1981, 2 gay San Francisco men were diagnosed with AIDS. The San Francisco AIDS Foundation was formed, and there had already been a death from AIDS in Sonoma County. Some lesbians stepped up to take care of those men and other gay men who were being abandoned and ignored by their families. Lesbian caregivers joined with others to form Face to Face. It offered emotional support, practical daily physical care, and did preventative trainings in schools, workplaces, and the general community. When they brought the AIDS quilt to the Santa Rosa Fairgrounds in 1989, over 10,000 people came to visit the quilt and mourn the fallen. In Sonoma County, of the 442 people who had been diagnosed with HIV at that point, more than half of them had already died. 20 to 30 new quilt panels from Sonoma County were added to the quilt, the AIDS quilt, in a ceremony. Other lesbians became part of service organizations such as Food for Thought, which still provides food, sundries, and nutritional information to men, women, and children with AIDS. Still others became part of ACT UP, which did political theater to protest the government's lack of action around HIV and AIDS. In 1988, ACT UP conducted a die-in held at the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors, asking for money for local AIDS organizations. Storm Jecker was a drug rehab counselor, a former addict, and a lesbian living with HIV. She helped start the Points North Needle Exchange Program in '93. Storm said, quote, "It is very crucial to understand that giving somebody a clean needle does not increase their drug use." By the early 1990s, Sonoma County had the 3rd highest rate of AIDS in the state. The HIV rate for women who used IV drugs or had sex with IV drug users had climbed 500%. This needle exchange program, illegal at the time, provided one of the only support systems for women, children, and addicts in Sonoma County. In 1995, Liz Cunningham was the first Sonoma County woman to publicize her HIV status. She demanded funding for Face-to-Face. She spoke on AIDS to health professionals and also advocated for youth, women, and people of color with AIDS. Her photo was used in both Sonoma County and San Francisco to publicize women with HIV.
In the 1980s and 90s, lesbians began to open more sole proprietorship businesses rather than collective businesses. Here's a sampling of what was here in Sonoma County. Jane Sipe became one of the first lesbian jewelers to create goddess-based jewelry, and it was sold to lesbians around the United States. Angel Productions started in 1985 by Linda Donahue and Sarah McNair. They provided award-winning audio recording, videography, and video editing. Their clients included bands, artists, local politicians, businesses, and the Cannes Film Festival. In 1995, Maria Dessous moved to Petaluma and opened Out West Garage. In addition to repairs, she offered do-it-yourself workshops on auto repair. Her shop is still open for business. Also in 95, Vicki Oleski and Michelle Ireland bought an existing barber shop in Santa Rosa that had a diverse clientele of men and had pornographic magazines to look at while you waited. They renamed it Two Women Doing Hair. The salon became a social gathering place in the community. Everyone was welcome. Lesbians, gays, transgender folks, cross-dressers, two-spirit people, and sex workers, as well as some of the former clients. In the mid-1980s and 90s, lesbian culture continued to build in Sonoma County. The Flyers were the first openly lesbian-identified softball team to play in Santa Rosa. Women who asked to join the team were advised that it was a gay team, and if they joined it, it would be assumed they were gay. This was a gay first in our area, where we were able to play our sport and not pretend to be anyone other than who we were. Elaine Rosenbaum and Glenna Holiday formed the team in 1978. The team played in the Housewives League in Santa Rosa and won a majority of the games in the first season. Within a year or two after the Flyers were formed, there were several openly lesbian teams playing in Santa Rosa. They included Aladdin, Minerva, Moonrise, Silver Wings, and others. And where lesbian gathers, there's bound to be dogs. There were dogs everywhere. There wasn't a night at the ballpark without a dog fight erupting from the sidelines somewhere. We don't know how lesbians got the rap of only having cats. The jock lesbians all had dogs, and back in those days, leashes were few and far between. Gail Remick produced the Women's Comedy Night, a benefit for the Chrysalis Counseling Center for Women from about 1983 to 1993. Gail was a comedian whose humor focused on recovery and 12-step programs, her Catholic upbringing, dysfunctional families, channeling, gays, lesbians, whatever absurd things bubbled up. She used her quirky sense of humor to reach out, heal, and educate the women she worked with. She was a counselor in the county welfare system. She worked with neglected and abused children. She also conducted HIV awareness and anti-homophobia training for police.
Quote, "What if all female bands were as common as all male bands? What if we could name 3 Native, Latin, and Asian American musicians without thinking twice? What if it was ordinary to see a woman running the sound at a concert, or if female producers and engineers weren't anomalies? What if there were more women running record companies? Unfortunately, not much has changed since 1986, when June Millington and Ann Hackler founded the Institute for the Musical Arts out in Bodega. June Millington, a Filipino-American, was a lead guitarist of the rock band Fanny, which was the first all-female rock band to release an album with a major label. They eventually released 5 albums, achieving 2 top 40 singles. June and Ann would bring top women musicians to Bodega to perform. They also taught workshops on everything from drumming to songwriting to sound engineering. Women would come from all over the West Coast to camp on their land and attend these workshops. They also held performances in Guerneville like Midsummer Dyke's Dream in 1988. The Well of Horniness, a one-act play by Holly Hughes, screamed lesbians. Tiana Lee directed it in 1990. The success of this play prompted Tiana and Judy DeRosa to form Tribad Productions and take on the larger project of bringing lesbian theater to Sonoma County. For 5 years, they created and produced 2 full productions and 1 holiday show a year. There were other lesbian theater productions here in Sonoma County. The first lesbian content play was Dip Me in Honey in 1988. And On the Mark Productions gave us the play Butch of My Dreams in 1993, as well as Born Guilty, a one-woman show by Pauline Fandler, which was staged in 1995. Playwright Carolyn Gage also wrote and produced several works while living here, including the play The Last Reading of Charlotte Cushman. And Lola, the League of Lesbian Actors, produced her play All Passion Unspent. Even the lesbian erotica industry has roots in Sonoma County. Tiger Rose Distribution created groundbreaking lesbian erotic films, you know, by, for, and about lesbians. They were one of the first to film lesbian sex scenes with a lesbian aesthetic and point of view, and using real lesbian actors. Hay Fever was one of their most popular films and featured flannel shirts, nature, and sex. They also distributed 3 videos of the 1986 Gay Games in San Francisco.
Lesbian Voters Action Caucus, or LVAC, started in 1981. The initial goal of LVAC was both political and educational. Research on ballot measures and local candidates assisted them in developing sample ballots that were distributed to lesbians in Sonoma County via newspapers. They also held a lecture series on current topics of interest to the lesbian community. LVAC also held benefits in the form of dances, spaghetti dinners, readers' theaters, and musical performances. In 1986, LVAC launched SCRAP 64, Sonoma County Residents Against Prop 64. Prop 64, also known as the Lyndon LaRouche's AIDS Initiative, eventually failed. It would have required that the names of thousands of people with HIV or AIDS had to be reported to public health authorities. It would have forced them to give up their jobs and would have forced thousands of children out of the schools. LVAC was also responsible for the Santa Rosa billboard that read, "Sonoma County lesbians wish you a gay and joyous 1991. But LVAC's biggest contribution was bringing the Pride Parade to Sonoma County, which we will talk about in a few minutes. In 1987, Forward Together was a multiple issue organizing effort that sought to continue the political upsurge in Sonoma County lesbian and gay communities. This was the first Sonoma County lesbian and gay activist organization that was intended to last for more than a single campaign. They provided a lesbian and gay community response through meeting with legislatures, requesting cohesive action on violence against the LGBTQ community, a reversal on the county ban for a fairy gathering, and the slow county-wide response to dealing with the AIDS crisis. In 1987, Magi Fedorka and Karen Callahan acted on behalf of Forward Together. They began the process of presenting the Pride Resolution to the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors. This resolution honors the many contributions of lesbian and gay citizens living in Sonoma County. Passage of this resolution would have given public recognition to an annual Pride Week at the end of June. In 1988, We the People, Sonoma County's lesbian and gay newspaper, was launched with the participation of many lesbian writers, editors, and graphic artists. Lois Perlman began her journalistic career there. Stories about the women's community, the recovery community, and relations between lesbians and gay men were among the many issues that were hashed out. After several years, Marilyn Chuck became the publisher and helped to optimize the operations. As a hard copy, black and white newspaper, We the People was a new way for people to find out what was going on in Sonoma County. The publication covered local and national news stories and had an extensive calendar of events. Lesbians wrote many of the regular columns. Some of the writers were Robin Gale, Magi Fedorka, Corey White, Mary Hinsdale, and Maddie Hirschfield. It was published for 25 years and still exists today as an online newsletter at gaysonoma.com.
Magi Fedorka, Georgia Prescott, Adam Richman, and Carrie Bloom founded the Sonoma County Lesbian and Gay Democratic Club in 1989. There had never been an effort like this before in Sonoma County. The founding members had to fight hard to obtain chartered Democratic Party status, which gained lesbians and gays a new prominence in local politics. Eventually, the following lesbians additionally were elected to the Sonoma County Democratic Central Committee: Carrie Bloom, Magi Fedorka, and Marguerite Longton. Magi was chair of the club from 1989 to 1991. The club was able to both counter homophobic tendencies in the local Democratic Party and in the Sonoma County political establishment. They organized a political candidate forum for our community to ask candidates where they stood on our issues. In 1990, for the first time, a local state Senate candidate used an LGBT endorsement on their Main Street campaign literature. Sonoma Wall was formed in 1989 as an umbrella group with Forward Together, LVAC, and other activists to organize the We Are Your Neighbors campaign. This campaign purchased full and half-page ads in county newspapers and featured ads with large group photographs of the Sonoma County lesbian and gay community. Hundreds of lesbians and gays came out in print. In addition to encouraging support for the passage of a Pride resolution, it was a campaign to make Sonoma County a healthier place for LGBT people to live. Maddie Hirschfield was the first openly lesbian candidate to run for political office in the county. She got involved in the local political scene first as a lesbian activist. In 1992, she was on the board of Project 10 and helped organize Sonoma County's first gay-straight alliance, which was at the Santa Rosa High School. She served as co-chair of the Sonoma County Lesbian and Gay Democratic Club, and for many years wrote a political column for the We the People newspaper. By 1995, Maddie was a member of the Sonoma County Human Rights Commission. That same year, she became a candidate for the Board of Supervisors, 5th District. Maddie was an all-inclusive grassroots candidate emphasizing building spirit and morale within various communities by encouraging projects that would improve quality of life. Although she did not win the race, Maddie went on to serve as chair of the Sonoma County Democratic Party and is now the political director of the North Bay AFL-CIO. Bo Laurent founded the Intersex Society of North America here in Sonoma County in 1993. With a mission to end shame, secrecy, and unwanted genital surgeries for people born with an anatomy that someone decided is not standard for female or male. After Bo moved to Petaluma in 2001, the Petaluma Butter and Egg Parade became the first event in modern history featuring intersex people marching openly in the streets as part of a PFLAG contingent. This movement is now international. And now to return to LVAC's accomplishments with Pride. Sonoma County Pride celebration started as a Pride picnic in 1987, sponsored by Forward Together. In 1990, after 3 years of efforts to get the Pride resolution passed, the lesbian and gay community decided they would not allow the board to vote on the resolution this time. Amidst the silent supervisors meeting, we proclaimed our own Pride Week. That same year, 1990, LVAC organized a march that included LVAC organized a Pride March on the sidewalks of Santa Rosa, which was followed by the annual Pride Picnic at Keyser Park in Windsor. In 1991, LVAC organized a march that included the Dykes on Bikes, who roared out of SRJC's Legion Gate onto Mendocino Avenue. Over 500 participants and 22 floats followed them into the streets and to Juilliard Park. Although not a permitted parade, this was considered by many people to have been Sonoma County's first gay pride parade. The Pride Picnic and celebration was held at Keyser Park in Windsor again. After 5 years of efforts, Forward Together finally saw the Pride resolution passed in 1992. The resolution was passed by the Sonoma County Board of Supervisors by a vote of 3-1. The lesbian and gay community finally gained public recognition in this declaration of a county-wide annual Pride Week. In 1992, LVAC produced the first officially permitted gay pride parade, which allowed for one lane down Mendocino Avenue with police and traffic monitoring. Dykes on Bikes took the lead again. Face to Face and many others participated. The Pride Picnic was held at the Founders Grove at the Sonoma County Fairgrounds. 1993 was the first year that Pride Parade and celebration were organized by the same group. Over 2,000 people attended the event held at the junior college. The newly formed Sonoma County Lesbian Gay Pride Committee sponsored both the Pride and the celebration. The Grand Marshals for 93 were Magi Fedorka and Mert Preston. George Prescott said, quote, "Sonoma County moved ahead at this celebration and there's no going back." That brings us up through 1995 and the end of our presentation tonight. Thank you all for attending.
Once again, we want to thank you all for being here and listening to us. We are still looking for new material to help us fill in the gaps in our LGBTQI history of Sonoma County. If you have information, pictures, stories, flyers, anything about lesbians, gay men, bisexual people, queers, transgender, and intersex people in Sonoma County, please contact us at our brand new Facebook page called LGBTQI History of Sonoma County.
And I'd like to take a few minutes to promote my class, which is called the LGBTQI History, a Sonoma County Timeline, 1947 to 1999. It's through the Older Adults Program at Santa Rosa Junior College, and the summer session is in full swing. It meets Wednesdays through August 5th from 1:30 to 3, and it's offered online via Zoom. This summer, we're talking about what went on here in Sonoma County in the 90s, and we started with the history of Pride that you just heard a bit about. This week, we talked about efforts to create Legacy Pride Center in the 80s and 90s, and then learned about the current needs for a community center from Jessica Hankins of LGBTQI Connections. That was a very informative talk she gave. Next week, we're going to be joined by Bill Blackburn, who organized an event called ManFest for gay men in the 90s. He was also part of the Billies, a gay men's gathering and support group. Other topics that are possibilities are lesbian theater groups, a review of what's happening with AIDS in the 90s, Roland's Review, which was a drag review with both men and women participating, PFLAG, and Project 10. Sometimes we have surprise guests, so that's also a possibility. The fall semester, we start all over again and following the timeline from 1947 on. This class is a discussion group, so bring your own stories to share, as well as any ephemera or memorabilia that you have. We always need copies of Runes, Women's Voices, and We the People. So if you've got them, I'll take them. Thanks again.
So now we're going to turn it over to Laura with questions, and we'll go on and we'll have our Q&A.
Thank you so much, Tina and Shad. That was really informative. I certainly learned a lot more about Sonoma County history in general, and I even saw my hairdresser featured, which was funny. I'll have to tell her this. So yeah, we're going to start out with some of the questions we have here, and I'll be asking the questions you've added in. I see a lot more questions come in, and I may sort of lump certain ones together if it's a really similar topic, and that's just so that we can get through the questions in a manner that everyone will get addressed. If we end this and there's something that we just never covered and you really want to get an answer to, you can definitely email me at the email address that is listed on your confirmation and our program description, and I will get back to you or reach out to our presenters and try to get you connected with an answer. There was a few questions that were really good questions that were sent to me ahead of time, and those ones I actually passed on so that they could incorporate them into the presentation. If you don't feel like we answered your question fully and you submitted a question ahead of time, please respond again in the comments and I will ask it again. But I think that we covered what those topics were. It was generally relating to issues of race into the mix of gender and sexuality in these groups and sort of how that played into the sort of intersectionality. So we have a question here. When I think the first questions I'm going to start with are probably relating to things you talked about earliest on in your presentation. So when did the police raids of bars like these stop? Were the lesbians in Sonoma County generally left alone? And were men left alone as well, or more or less than women?
Want me to take that?
Sure.
I know that for the Star and Crescent, which was actually a cafe, it wasn't a bar, but they served alcohol there. Carla made a big effort to befriend this very friendly cop that came and visited her when she first opened. And she never had any problems with the police. And then Santa Rosa Inn, which was also in Santa Rosa, but it was outside the city limits. I think that there were some scuffles there. I don't know that there was any police raids there. I'd have to have somebody that was around earlier than I was in the early 70s to maybe validate that. But my understanding is that the kind of police raids they had in San Francisco did not happen here. Now that, and I don't know about the Monkey Pod. That was the other bar that.
Yeah, that was my understanding also was that the sheriff's department here was much more sympathetic and that the bars were less rowdy and also the bars up here, although there was a mafia presence in Sonoma County, I don't believe that the gay LGBT bars were mafia connected here the way they were in San Francisco and other places.
And that actually answers, not sure if you were looking at that, the next question. So I think that answered the question. Oh, we had a question when you were referring to the girl at the shelter that was reading a lesbian novel. What novel was it, if you know?
No, we don't have any idea what it was.
Okay.
She was a student in a women's studies class at the Santa Rosa JC. So it may have been connected to that, or it may have been just something she was reading on her own.
We actually don't have that many more questions. So please, if you have a question, we have a little bit more time and we can definitely answer some more questions.
Just curious why the Santa Rosa Inn wasn't mentioned at all. That's where I hit my bottom in alcohol.
Yeah. Well, It wasn't a lesbian bar. There's a lot of
That's-
lesbians that went to it.
That's true. That's true.
And so that's what we were sort of trying to focus on. It's sort of, my favorite story about it is from one of the truck drivers from Morningstar Trucking who went there first in the early 70s, and it was a kick-ass cowboy bar. And then the gay men started going there, but it took Zola Ferguson and some other woman, I can't remember who it was, to get your guts up and go down there and decide it was a women's bar too. Is that true?
I think we went there one night a week for a while, like
Okay.
Friday nights or something.
Mhm.
Hard to remember that back that far.
I do have a couple of questions coming in. One person is interested in contact info for your classes at SRJC, and it's totally fine if you don't have that right here, but if you
No, I
want to
do.
send that to me, then
I
I
can
can
give
send
it.
that out to people in the email.
It's just my email address at Sonoma at Santa Rosa JC, which is cdungan, DUNGAN, at santarosa.edu. Thank you.
Somebody asking, are young people involved in the LGBTQI timeline?
Say what?
Are young people involved in the LGBTQ timeline? Or
Not yet.
work on it?
We'd love to have some join us. It's been, we would love to have their perspective and help us do layouts. And believe me, we could have used some tech help putting this thing together. We're two old ones who are tech, we're not as high tech as the younger people are. So I wanted to say something about bars. There was also a bar across the street, kind of on the other side of the street near the Santa Rosa Inn that was actually owned by, I believe, a Japanese woman. And it was in the back, in the building where there's now a music store.
It's in Cotati. It's in
Yeah,
Cotati.
yeah, in Cotati.
Rubies.
All right. Oh, I have to say, somebody's asking, our exhibition is opened through, closes in September 20th. So you have some time. If, immediately isn't quite when you feel comfortable, we totally understand that. And also on our website, we have a couple different virtual exhibitions or sort of virtual tours of this exhibition. So you can actually click through and read the slides and learn information about it, or you can take a literal virtual tour through the museum, which is a kind of a cool new thing we have set up.
Everybody for showing up. That was great.
And remember, if you want to have it presented at some meeting, or you want to have our timeline panels, just contact us and we can bring them down to you.
That's great. Thank you.